Hey, welcome back to Kelly's Take 2 Pre-Licensing Zoom review. It's great to be with you again, and I appreciate you spending time with me today. Today, we are going to dive into a little review related to landlord and tenant issues. If you're using the Dearborn 10th edition book, this would be units 11 and 12. According to the information provided to us about the number of testing questions per topic, you should experience 2 questions on both of these units on the national and 2 questions on both of these units on the state. All right, so I'm going to break it down for you. We're going to kick it off with knowing about the 4 different types of leasehold estates. Leasehold estates might also be called non-freehold estates. So grab your pencil and let's go ahead and knock this out. If you're taking notes, this might be a great time to put together a web graphic organizer where you have in the middle bubble, it says 4, and then leasehold estates, and then off to the side, the 4 prongs. So the first one that you want to remember is called year to year. So an estate for from year to year. That's number 1. Number 2 is period to period, estate from period to period. I'm really giving this to you in brass tacks because this is a review. So I might, shorten the phraseology to help you take notes more efficiently. Number 3, at will, estate at will. And number 4, estate at sufferance. What are the big nuggets you need to remember about each one? Number 1, first of all, an estate that is year to year ends automatically. You're expected to hit the road, to be out. Now let's move over to the estate at sufferance because they're kind of related. If you have an estate that's year to year, has a definite termination date, has a beginning and an end and a termination date. So somebody is in that type of a situation and then they don't leave. They stay on the premises without permission of the landlord. That's going to be the estate at sufferance. The landlord is suffering because the tenant is staying over past the expiration date and not paying the rent. So we'll have to go through the eviction process. We'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so estate from year to year, beginning and ending, you don't have to give notice. It terminates automatically. It's not a year-to-year period, though. It could be any period of time, estate for year to year. I know it's weird for sure. So it could be a vacation rental that goes from Sunday to Saturday, is an estate from year to year. All right, number next, an estate that's from period to period or periodic tenancy is one that renews automatically. It will renew automatically until notice is given. You don't really need to memorize what all those dates are and how much notice and all of that. Just know the brass tacks, the periodic estate, period to period, will renew automatically until somebody gives notice. Number next is the estate at will. The estate as will is for an undefined time, and it's just kind of amorphous out there. So we don't really know how long the person's going to stay or whatnot. Think of it as a guest who stays past the 3-day rule, or think of it as a young adult who's come back for spring break at their parents' house, then they just never leave. Well, you've got an estate at will. An estate at will, you do not need any notice to end that estate. One person simply says to the other, it's over, bye. Okay. Now, if you have an estate at will and your guest, your young adult who now suddenly you wake up and is 40 years old one day, won't leave, you can't use what are called self-help eviction methods to get rid of this adult who is still living in their parents' house. Self-help would be things like And if you didn't know any better, you'd probably do it. I know, I kind of would if I didn't know any better. But anyway, self-help eviction is illegal, and it includes things like changing the locks on the door, removing the door from the hinges, turning off utilities, posting a fake eviction notice, throwing your person's stuff out on the street, all of that self-help eviction, and that's a no-no. You actually have to take your adult child to court to get them to move out. All right, so I believe we covered leasehold estates, year to year, ends automatically, period to period, renews automatically. Estate at will, no notice required, and it's for an unspecified time. Estate at sufferance, consider that to be a holdover tenant. They started with a lease that had an expiration date, and they just ignored it and stayed anyway without permission of the landlord. All right, very good. Moving on. Let's talk about the 8 types of leases. You will more than likely get a vocabulary question regarding the 8 main types of leases. They are listed in your book. I'm going to hit them pretty quickly. You might want to make a note to yourself to go back and look up the definitions. You really just want 2 to 5 words written off to the side of each one of these just to help you differentiate between the 8. So number 1 is a gross lease. A gross lease is the most typical residential. So all of the property owner's costs have to be covered. The tenant is not responsible for any of the operating costs. We'll put it that way. The tenant pays one amount, one rental amount, and that's it. And that rental amount should cover all of the property owner's expenses. Number next is a percent lease. A percent lease, well, the rest of these I'm going to tell you about actually are very common in commercial, by the way. Okay, here we go. So the percent lease is one, think of it as, or align it with retail. So the retailer, let's say it's, I don't know, Belk or Macy's or something like that, will pay a base rent and then a percentage of their gross receipts or gross income to the company. Number 3 is a net lease. You're most familiar probably with something called a triple net lease or some such thing. So a net lease is where the tenant pays the majority of the expenses and then a prorated amount of the common area maintenance with that as well. Number next is a graduated lease. This is a user-friendly lease, I like to think of it. This is where the tenant's going to pay a base amount and it will increase by a certain amount every year for a certain number of years. So maybe your rent starts out as $700 a month and then doubles the next year, triples the next year, and then maybe levels off, something like that. That would be a graduated lease. An index lease is exactly that. It's a lease that's tied to some type of index, like the cost of living index, something like that. A ground lease is where you are renting just the land, or the landlord is renting just the land. This is very common with your big box stores like CVS, possibly Walmart, those sorts of things. So these leases are typically for many, many, many decades. Some people will say it's like 99 years, but it's not always 99 years, but definitely is for a long time, many, many decades. Number next is an oil and mineral lease, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's for the leasing the oil or mineral rights on a piece of property. And number last is a full service lease. That is one where you can kind of rent office space by the hour or as needed at the last moment, those sorts of things. Those are going to be your most expensive leases. That's going to cover all the operating expense plus the cost incurred by maintaining the property itself, all that. So it's your most expensive. All right, let's shift gears. We're going to talk about so that's national over there, by the way. Oh, one more thing. Well, I'll mention it in a minute about national. because it's a question I got on the practice exam, but I'll bring it up in just a second. All right, let's kick off this segment talking about the North Carolina Residential Rental Agreement Act. So again, North Carolina specific. The main nuggets out of this act would be that the landlord is charged with providing fit and habitable units. So all the main systems have to be working. Air conditioning is not one of the main systems. The other systems would be things like plumbing, potable water, drinking water, electrical, security, meaning you can lock the premises up. And there's one more I'm thinking of, but think of it as kind of the working systems of the unit. So it doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be anything like that, but it has to be safe. It has to be fit and habitable. The tenant is responsible for two things: maintaining the property, and secondarily, believe it or not, paying the rent. Isn't that something? Okay. So if the landlord is not providing fit and habitable environment or units, and the tenant continues to press for fit and habitable conditions, and the landlord continues to not provide that. So for instance, if the heating system goes out in January and the landlord does not come in a timely manner and fix that heating system, maybe it takes them weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, then the tenant has the right to effectively leave the premises without penalty. That's called constructive eviction. They have no choice but to practically evict themselves because the conditions are so unfit, so uninhabitable. Very good. Now, on the national side of the PSI practice test that I just took, it had a constructive eviction question that was very different from what I just explained to you. And it was something like, if the property no longer can be used because of court order or a change of zoning or some such thing for the type of lease agreement that's in place, then the tenant can leave based on this notion of constructive eviction. So be aware of that. All right, so constructive eviction is the only remedy really that a tenant has when the landlord is breaching the lease agreement. In North Carolina, the tenant may not just withhold rent. That's what most people would think. If the tenant withholds rent, that would be grounds for eviction by the landlord. And the proper term, or the legal term for eviction, is summary ejectment. You don't need to know all the ins and outs about how summary ejectment works or those sorts of things, but know that word, that phraseology, that eviction and summary ejectment are one and the same. All right, now we talked about a minute ago, what if you want to, if you're a landlord and you want to evict someone, what do? You can't do self-help eviction. That's a no-no. You also can't do something called retaliatory eviction. Retaliatory eviction is when the landlord is upset with the tenant because they're pressing the landlord on a legal issue, trying to make them work the heating system. Or maybe they've joined a tenant's rights group organization or some such thing, and the landlord doesn't like that. So they retaliate by attempting to evict this tenant. That's a no-go if the instance is within a 12-month period. So can't do that. Okay, how did I write that? I said for 12 months, retaliatory eviction is a no-go for 12 months following the tenant pressing some type of legal rights assertion. So the landlord can't retaliate. All right, next. There are rules regarding what happens to the tenant. What are the tenant's rights in the case of a foreclosure? So if the tenant is living in a home, the federal law states that if the tenant is living on a property, the property is foreclosed upon, the new owner has to give this tenant 90 days notice before taking physical possession of the property. If they want to live in it, they've got to give them 90 days notice. And then if they refuse to leave, again, we're going to have to run through that summary ejectment process. Okay, we're just getting these real good nuggets out of units 11 and 12. So thanks for keeping up a good pace with me, because I know I'm moving through it pretty quickly. Next, let's talk about the North Carolina Tenant Security Deposit Act. And so I'm going to give you the main parts, and then I'm going to show you some reference material that's really just top notch. All right, so here we go. So the maximum in North Carolina that a landlord can collect for a property, depending on the length of the lease, would be 2 months worth. So 2 months is the max that a tenant can ever be charged in North Carolina for a security deposit, period. The security deposit has to be held in a trust account, that's FDIC insured. It could, if it's a property owner, the property owner could get or obtain an insurance bond that would guarantee the deposit. That's only for property owners. If you are a property manager, by the way, who has to be a broker, not a provisional broker. So if you're a property manager, you have to put that deposit into a trust account. Once the tenant leaves the premises, then the landlord is to provide within 30 days, an accounting of what's going on with that security deposit. If the landlord needs some extra time to determine what the final, how it's going to shake out, finally, they can have a maximum of 60 days to get the accounting done, as long as they touch base, provide an interim accounting at that 30-day or by that 30-day mark. The security deposit is the security deposit, period. So again, the maximum that can ever be collected is 2 months worth. The pet fee, if there is one, is a separate situation. A cleaning fee is a separate situation. It can't be part of the security deposit. When the tenant is looking to get their security deposit back, what can they be charged for? They can be charged for extraordinary wear and tear, but they cannot be charged for ordinary wear and tear. Ordinary wear and tear would be things like broken blinds, leaky faucets, a little bit of dust and dirt, carpet cleaning, it's ordinary wear and tear, those sorts of things. Extraordinary damage would be things like crazy wall paint colors, broken fixtures in the bathroom, broken kitchen countertops would count, abject filth would count, those sorts of things. So there's a great reference, I'm going to show it to you now, that I suggest you study about the North Carolina Security Deposit Act. So let me get this up for you. Here it is. You can find this at the Real Estate Commission's website. It's under publications. So you click on the tab that says publications, it's a drop-down menu. You find the one that talks about tenant security deposits. It gives you great information right there. So I highly suggest looking that over. It's not very long, 4 pages, great info. And then this one, I just love this one, by the Real Estate Commission as well. Same area. So you go to the commission's website, ncrec.gov. You go to publications, drop down, find the questions and answers on renting residential real estate. It is really, really informative. And when I work with my tenants now, I always actually give them this questions and answers related to a security deposit. And my tenants can't believe that I hand this out. They're like, what? I said, we got to follow the rules, people. Come on now. So it's great for studying, and it's great for business as well. All right, last in your book, I'm going to stop sharing that, is a little bit of information about the Vacation Rentals Act, North Carolina Vacation Rentals Act. There's a list of about, oh gosh, I think it's about 9 different things that you want to kind of keep your ears perked for related to that. But the most important one really is that if a buyer is purchasing a vacation home or a set of vacation cabins or some such thing, The current reservations have to be honored for 180 days before the new owner can take physical possession. And friends, that concludes our Take Two review of Unit 11. So I hope that was good and quick for you. You got a lot out of it. Remember to stay tuned for more. I'm going to handle the property management unit in just a second, so hang in there for that one. Remember to subscribe so you get all the latest updates. Thank you, and I'll see you in just a minute.